Clara Thompson stepped into the courtroom, clutching a small stack of crumpled papers, her hands trembling slightly. At 28, she had always tried to handle life on her own, but today, facing the cold, imposing room, she felt exposed and small. Judges and spectators watched her with mild curiosity, but her husband, Michael Thompson, sat across the room, arms crossed. A smirk of superiority plastered across his face. Every glance from him felt like a silent accusation, a reminder that he had brought her here under his terms, and now he seemed intent on watching her fail in front of everyone. She tried to straighten her posture, inhaling deeply to steady herself. I want to speak for myself, Clara began, her voice wavering. The prosecutor leaned forward, eyebrows raised, his tone sharp. Miss Thompson, do you even understand what you're doing? This isn't a place for unprepared statements. Laughter, quiet but unmistakable, rippled through the courtroom. Her vulnerability, her lack of legal representation, made her an easy target. Michael's eyes gleamed with satisfaction as he whispered to his attorney, clearly enjoying the spectacle. Clara's throat tightened as she struggled to present her side. Every word was cut off, every explanation met with skepticism or ridicule. Michael's smirk never faltered. His voice occasionally broke in with sarcastic remarks that made her cheeks burn. "She's confused, Your Honor," he said loudly, drawing gasps from the audience. "She doesn't know the first thing about her rights. Allowing her to speak is absurd." Clara felt herself shrinking, invisible and powerless, the weight of humiliation pressing down with every passing second. She realized that without help, every chance of fairness in the courtroom was slipping through her fingers. Just as a sense of despair threatened to swallow her, the courtroom door creaked open. Heads turned instinctively, and a ripple of murmurs ran through the audience. Evelyn Parker, Clara's mother, stepped in, her presence commanding attention without a word. She paused briefly, eyes locking onto her daughter, then slowly scanned Michael and the prosecutor with an unflinching gaze. The room seemed to hold its breath, sensing that this was no ordinary visitor. Evelyn's calm yet powerful demeanor promised a shift, a twist in the story that no one could have predicted. Clara's heart pounded as hope flickered within her, the first spark of possibility in a room that had so far offered only humiliation and despair. Evelyn Parker pushed open the courtroom door with a determination that immediately silenced the room. Heads turned and whispers filled the air as she walked briskly toward the front, her eyes locked on her daughter, Clara. Michael's smug expression faltered for the first time, replaced by a flicker of unease. The judge raised an eyebrow, intrigued by the sudden interruption. Evelyn's presence was magnetic. Every step radiated authority and purpose. Even the prosecutor straightened in his seat, sensing that this was no ordinary spectator entering the court. The air shifted. The balance of power, once so firmly against Clara, began to waver. "Your Honor," Evelyn began, her voice steady yet sharp, "I am Clara's mother, and I know the truth of these events. I ask permission to speak on her behalf, to clarify matters that have been misrepresented." The courtroom held its breath. Michael muttered under his breath, clearly irritated, while the prosecutor leaned forward, skeptical. Evelyn's gaze swept across the room, meeting judges, jury, and attorneys with the calm confidence of someone who knew her facts and refused to be intimidated. Every word she spoke was calculated, carrying weight far beyond what anyone had anticipated. Evelyn began presenting details that had been overlooked, receipts, messages, and timelines that contradicted the opposition's narrative. Her voice never wavered, each statement precise and compelling. The prosecutor tried to interject, questioning her right to speak, but Evelyn countered smoothly, preempting objections with evidence and logic. The courtroom's atmosphere thickened with tension. Every person present could feel the shift. Michael's face grew red with frustration as his carefully constructed attack began to crumble. Clara, watching from her seat, felt a surge of hope mixed with disbelief, seeing her mother turn the tide in real time. With every point Evelyn made, the jury's expressions shifted from polite detachment to genuine curiosity. Witnesses who had seemed aligned with Michael's narrative now hesitated, reconsidering what they had assumed. Even the judge leaned forward slightly, absorbing the unexpected information. Michael, desperate, began snapping at the prosecutor for answers, but the cracks in his strategy were visible to everyone. Evelyn's presence and clarity had not only unsettled him, but also introduced a new dynamic. One where Clara, once powerless, now had an advocate who could challenge the assumptions of the court. As the session neared its first recess, Evelyn laid out a piece of evidence that stunned everyone, a letter that confirmed key details Clara had tried to explain but had been ignored. Gasps rippled through the courtroom, and the judge's gaze softened as he considered its significance. The moment left the audience, jury, and even Michael frozen, realizing that the trial's outcome was no longer predetermined. Clara, clutching her mother's hand under the bench, allowed herself a flicker of hope. This revelation marked a turning point, setting the stage for the next confrontation and leaving open the possibility that the tide of the trial might finally turn in her favor. Evelyn Parker laid the first document on the courtroom table with a calm precision that belied the tension in the room. It was a series of emails and receipts that directly contradicted Michael's claims, each one meticulously highlighted to guide the judge's attention. She spoke slowly, clearly, forcing everyone to absorb the weight of her evidence. Murmurs rippled through the audience as people began to realize that what had seemed like a hopeless case for Clara was suddenly shifting. Michael's face tightened, his confident smirk fading as he realized the control he had relied on was slipping through his fingers. The prosecutor, caught off guard by Evelyn's poise, attempted to interrupt, insisting the documents were irrelevant and improperly presented. Evelyn countered, citing specific laws and procedural precedents with a commanding voice that demanded attention. "Your Honor, these are not merely documents. They are proof of misrepresentation and neglect," she said firmly. Every eye in the courtroom followed her, including the jurors, who exchanged glances of intrigue. Clara sat frozen, feeling the immense relief of someone finally speaking the truth on her behalf, yet the pressure of the moment pressed down like a weight she could hardly bear. Michael leaned toward his attorney, whispering in frustration, clearly rattled by Evelyn's unexpected knowledge and strategy. "You can't let her get away with this," he muttered under his breath, his hands clenching the edge of the bench. The prosecutor tried to regain control, questioning the credibility of Evelyn's evidence and casting doubt on her motives. Evelyn, however, remained composed, meeting each challenge with logic and unwavering calm. Each counterpoint she offered chipped away at the opposition's arguments, turning the courtroom from a hostile environment into a battleground where the scales of justice began to tilt subtly toward Clara. Unexpectedly, a witness who had been reluctant to speak earlier stepped forward at Evelyn's prompting. Their testimony confirmed several crucial details that Michael had attempted to hide or manipulate. The room fell into silence as the witness recounted facts that directly supported Clara's case. Michael's jaw tightened, and he leaned back in his chair, visibly frustrated as the tide shifted against him. Clara's heart raced, part fear, part relief, as she realized that the truth, long buried under manipulation and dismissal, was finally emerging. The tension was electric, every word spoken holding the potential to change everything. As Evelyn continued to present evidence, the courtroom dynamics grew more volatile. Michael's face flushed with anger each time she countered his claims, and even the prosecutor struggled to maintain authority. The jurors were fully engaged now, leaning forward to catch every detail, while spectators whispered among themselves, clearly captivated by the unfolding drama. Clara felt a mixture of empowerment and exhaustion. Watching her mother dismantle the opposition was both inspiring and terrifying. She had entered the courtroom as vulnerable and alone, but with Evelyn's guidance, the balance of power was slowly shifting in her favor. By the end of the session, Evelyn dropped a final piece of evidence that stunned everyone. A letter signed by a key witness admitting to prior misinformation, directly undermining Michael's entire argument. Gasps echoed in the room, and the judge's eyes narrowed thoughtfully at the implications. Michael's shoulders slumped slightly, his confidence shaken, while Clara allowed herself a small, cautious sense of hope. The trial had reached a critical turning point, leaving everyone in suspense as the courtroom waited to see whether Evelyn's strategy could carry them through the next stage, or whether one misstep might undo all her work. The courtroom buzzed with tension, as Evelyn Parker delivered her arguments with precision and unwavering confidence. The jurors leaned forward, eyes fixed on every word, while spectators exchanged murmurs of surprise and admiration. Clara felt a flicker of hope, gripping the edge of her seat as her mother dismantled Michael's earlier assertions piece by piece. Each rebuttal not only strengthened Clara's position, but also exposed Michael's arrogance and attempts to manipulate the narrative. The room seemed to hold its breath, as if collectively aware that the balance of the trial was shifting right before their eyes. Michael's composure cracked as Evelyn presented yet another compelling piece of evidence, one that directly contradicted his claims and undermined the credibility of his previous statements. His voice grew sharp and defensive, lashing out at the prosecutor for allowing such irrelevant points to be made. Clara's heart pounded. Seeing her husband so aggressive only heightened her own anxiety. She realized that despite the clear advantages her mother had established, one slip could undo everything. Every gesture, every word mattered, and the stakes were higher than ever. Clara's confidence began to grow, however, as she watched Evelyn remain composed under pressure. Her mother's firmness was like an anchor, steadying her own shaking hands and racing thoughts. Clara inhaled deeply, remembering the initial humiliation she had faced in the courtroom, and felt a quiet determination begin to form. She could still feel the weight of the judgmental gazes and Michael's contempt, but for the first time, she sensed that the tide might actually be turning. The emotional burden was heavy, but hope now outweighed despair. The jurors whispered among themselves, clearly impacted by Evelyn's clarity and authority. Michael's attempts to regain control became increasingly desperate, his words sharper, his posture rigid. The prosecutor shifted uneasily in his chair, unsure how to counter the unexpected strength of Evelyn's case. Clara watched every reaction, noting each crack in her husband's facade. The courtroom, once a place of humiliation and fear, had transformed into a stage where truth and strategy collided with raw emotion, leaving the outcome uncertain and the tension almost unbearable. As the session drew toward the day's close, Evelyn paused, letting the weight of her final statements sink in. The judge's gaze lingered thoughtfully on the documents and testimonies she had presented, and even Michael's jaw tightened as he realized the extent of the challenge he now faced. Clara allowed herself a brief moment of hope, knowing that the decisive arguments were imminent and that the trial's ultimate outcome rested on the next moves. Suspense hung in the air like a tangible force, signaling that the closing act would determine not only the verdict, but the very balance of power in the courtroom. Evelyn Parker rose to deliver the final arguments, her presence commanding the entire courtroom. She walked slowly to the center, her eyes scanning the jurors, then landing briefly on Clara, who gripped the edge of her seat. Every word she spoke carried weight, emotion, and precision, as if each phrase were carefully measured to pierce through the web of doubt woven by Michael and the prosecutor. Documents, photographs, and testimonies were presented with clarity, leaving little room for argument. The courtroom seemed to pause, the usual murmur of whispers replaced by an almost tangible tension that pressed down on everyone present. Michael's confidence wavered for the first time since the trial began. He leaned toward his attorney, muttering angrily, trying to find a way to counter Evelyn's points, but the evidence she presented was meticulous and irrefutable. Every objection he raised was deflected with calm logic, forcing him to backtrack, his frustration visible to all. Clara watched her husband's face, noting the subtle cracks in his composure, and felt a mixture of fear and hope. She realized that the stakes had never been higher, and that one wrong word or hesitation could undo the progress they had fought so hard to achieve. Evelyn's voice grew stronger as she summarized the core of the case, weaving a narrative that made the jury feel the injustice Clara had endured. She emphasized Clara's courage in representing herself and highlighted Michael's attempts to manipulate and humiliate her. Each argument struck like a carefully aimed blow, dismantling any remaining defense the opposition could offer. The jurors leaned forward, captivated by her reasoning, while spectators in the gallery shifted, murmuring among themselves. Even the judge seemed visibly impressed by the clarity and emotional weight of Evelyn's presentation. Clara's hands shook as she watched, but she felt a surge of trust in her mother's skill and determination. For the first time, she could imagine a possible victory, however slim. The fear that had gripped her from the very first moment in the courtroom began to mingle with cautious optimism. Every detail, every document, every testimony had been leveraged expertly by Evelyn, creating a sense of inevitability that left the jury with a clear picture of the truth. Michael's smug arrogance had faded, replaced by desperation, as he realized that the final arguments had shifted momentum irreversibly. As Evelyn concluded, she fixed her gaze on the judge, offering a respectful but firm nod. The room fell silent, the weight of her closing statement settling over everyone. Michael slumped slightly in his chair, muttering under his breath, while Clara felt a strange mixture of exhaustion and hope. The decision now rested entirely in the hands of the jury and the judge. The suspense was almost unbearable, as every person in the courtroom waited with bated breath. What had seemed hopeless just days ago was now a tense cliffhanger, leaving everyone desperate to discover the verdict that would finally decide Clara's fate. The courtroom fell silent as the judge cleared his throat and opened the envelope containing the jury's decision. Every eye was fixed on him, the tension so thick it felt like it could be cut with a knife. Clara sat rigid in her chair, heart pounding, fingers intertwined with her mother's. Michael's smug confidence had all but vanished, replaced by a rigid, tense posture as he tried to hide the nervous tremor in his hands. Spectators leaned forward, whispering among themselves, sensing that the moment would define the lives of everyone in that room. The air was electric with anticipation, every second stretching impossibly long. When the judge finally spoke, his voice echoed with authority. "We, the jury, find in favor of the plaintiff, Clara Thompson." Gasps and murmurs filled the courtroom. Some audibly celebrated, while others sat frozen, absorbing the shock. Clara's knees weakened and she clutched her mother's hand, tears threatening to fall. Evelyn's expression softened with quiet pride, though her eyes glistened with her own restrained emotion. Michael's face drained of color, a mixture of disbelief and fury crossing his features. The balance of power had shifted entirely, leaving him unable to mask the magnitude of the defeat. Despite the victory, Clara felt a strange emptiness. The courtroom's applause, the shocked gasps, and even the relief in Evelyn's eyes could not erase the months of humiliation, fear, and anxiety she had endured. The emotional scars of being ridiculed and underestimated lingered, reminding her that winning did not erase the pain. She realized that this trial had tested her resilience, courage, and trust in her mother. Even as the gavel pounded to signal the official end, she understood that the real work, rebuilding her confidence, confronting lingering fears, and repairing her relationship with Michael, was only beginning.